Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Cynthia Wins, welcoming you to another episode of SLB New Energy Conversations. Today, we're diving into a topic that is crucial for our planet's future and the global economy: the petrochemical industry and its journey towards decarbonization. Petrochemicals are the backbone of a modern industry, providing essential materials for everything from pharmaceuticals and agriculture to manufacturing and consumer goods. However, the production of petrochemicals is also a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions. Decarbonizing this industry is not just an environmental imperative, but it's also an economic opportunity, allowing the industry to reduce its carbon footprint, comply with regulations, and meet the growing demand for sustainable products. To help us navigate this complex and vital topic, we have a special guest, Tim Rembold, SLB's Petrochemicals Director. Tim is an expert in the petrochemical industry and has been at the forefront of discussions around decarbonization and the transition to greener solutions. Welcome, Tim. We are so glad to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Cynthia. I'm really happy to be here.
Glad to be here as well. Tim, so let's just start with an overview. I'm thinking of the petrochemical industry. Like, what is the overview of the petrochemical industry and its economic importance?
Sure, I'd love to talk about that. So the petrochemical industry is very significant towards how we live our everyday modern lives. So if you look just at the economical standpoint, it impacts roughly 7% of global GDP, and it's responsible for over 120 million jobs, and that's per the European Chemical Council. We do see quite many different uses for petrochemicals in everyday life. So it impacts everything from fertilizers like ammonia and urea that are used to help grow our population. We also see the use in sustainable solutions. So ethylene vinyl acetate, which is used in solar cells in photovoltaic solar systems. We also see polyurethane that's used for home and building insulation. So many different applications moving forward. The challenge is that the petrochemical industry is really based off of feedstocks that are oil and gas and coal. If you look at it, the Department of Energy estimated that over 90% of petrochemicals made in the U.S. are from oil or gas. So just to clarify, petrochemicals and chemicals are used pretty interchangeably in the industry, as most all chemicals and petrochemicals are made from oil and gas or coal.
Okay, well, let's talk about decarbonization.
Sure.
So when you think about the impact of having the petrochemical industry decarbonize, what does that look like?
So if you look at overall emissions, and what we're really concerned about here are greenhouse gas emissions, right, that impact climate change. And those are coming from CO2 release, from NOx, from other chemicals that could damage the environment. So the industry is looking at how do we remove those? How do we get rid of those? If you look at overall industrial emissions globally, the petrochemical industry is responsible for 15% of those. So it's right behind steel and cement in terms of emissions. If you look at the importance, though, and the concentration of that, you see very quickly that just a few chemicals contribute over half of the emissions.
Oh.
And that's due to the widespread of several chemicals. So if you just take ammonia, methanol, and ethylene and decarbonize those, you would decarbonize half the industry. So that's great. One thing we say, too, or one thing that we look at is the difference between how do you decarbonize your existing plants that you are already operating, that are already making chemicals globally, and how do you decarbonize future plants? And so these plants are not something that, you build tomorrow, you run it for a day, a week, a year. These are run for 30 plus years. Actually, in the US, we have a refinery that's been in operation for over 100 years. So it's something that they run for a long time. You fix and update the efficiency of them every 5 to 7 years. But it's a long-term asset. And so you have to think in terms of long-term economics as well as decarbonization. We do see that most of the plants for an extended period of time have been looking at improving their efficiency. And that's not just from a decarbonization lens, but also to make more efficient chemical products from less feedstock, using less energy. Now the shift has been towards decarbonization. So what we're seeing, though, is that most chemical producers And I'll use chemical and petrochemical somewhat interchangeably since currently most chemicals are made from oil and gas. But most chemical producers, they're actually have already done the easy steps for going to, low carbon electricity or, removing leaks and other things from the systems, which make it really easy to make sure that, they've, or what I meant to say is that they've already taken the easy steps. And so now the next steps that they're going to take is going to include a significant amount of capital expenditure so that they can do a larger retrofit or build a whole new plant. And that has to make sense on a 30-year timescale.
Tim, can you talk more about the role of new technologies and green fuels in this transition?
Sure. So new technologies are very important to the chemical industry. The chemical industry in the past has had essentially a long history of innovation and implementing new technologies at a commercial scale. We see most of the decarbonization challenges around the chemical and petrochemical industry is around two areas. So first, you have your feedstocks. And so that's your oil, gas, coal, as well as your electricity. How do you decarbonize that? Are you looking at switching to something like green hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen? Are you looking to switch to bioethanol or renewable natural gas to replace part of that? So that's one potential solution. The other area we see is that these chemical reactions require a lot of high temperature heat. And so you have to burn a lot of fossil fuels to get the boilers, the furnaces to operate at those high temperatures. And so customers are looking at how do we decarbonize that portion? Do we electrify it? Do we go ahead and burn natural gas, but then we go ahead and do carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture and ideally utilization? That's what we're looking at. And we are working with several customers on how to complete carbon capture and storage, or also look at how do we do carbon capture and enhanced oil recovery with that CO2 that's made.
So, speaking of challenges, what are some of the challenges the industry faces in this transition?
Sure. So we really look at three areas: the safety, the reliability of the unit, and as well the human factor. So let's start with reliability, actually. So these plants are expected to run 24/7, 360 plus days a year. You have to make sure any process that you install, any new process, has to operate that well, and it has to be that reliable. They only typically take down chemical plants and refinery units every 3, 4, 5 years. So you need to make sure it's going to work as soon as you install it and start it up. Secondly, safety is critical to these companies. You're dealing with some dangerous chemicals, and you have to protect your employees against that through engineering controls and many other items. Luckily, the new technology developers that are out in the market, they're doing a great job of doing both scale up as well as looking at the hazards of their process so that they understand fully from the lab scale to the pilot scale to demo plants to commercial scale what issues you're going to potentially run into, the reliability of each piece of equipment, as well as how to keep people safe around it. Finally, I want to always bring up the human factor. There's engineers, operators, managers that are running these facilities, and they're all trying to do their best. They need to be trained, though, on these new technologies.
Of course.
You can't expect somebody that's used to running a refinery steam methane reformer to be able to just go run a hydrogen green electrolyzer the next week. You have to train them. There's one story I like to bring up from earlier in my career is that we were at an ammonia facility installing a new technology, and the technology was state of the art. It was the most economical. On paper, it should have been the most efficient way to produce ammonia. What we didn't anticipate was that the operators were not trained on how to operate it. So they would see issues in it and accidentally shut down the plant. And so what we thought would be the most reliable ended up having one of the highest shutdown rates that first year until we got better operator training. So we have to make sure that the operators are fully trained with either simulations, digital twins, and other tools to make sure they know how to use these new technologies.
Just out of curiosity, before I move on to the next question,
Mhm.
the pilots and the implementation before you roll it out to a plant is Years, months? How long is that?
So it can be, usually we're talking on a scale of years. And that's where there's somewhat a push and pull, right? Because you would love to just scale something up immediately, but it's too risky. And
Yeah.
so how do you do it efficiently? What scale? And that's where the chemical engineers go back to their office and say, okay, we think we can do right here. The chemists get involved, the managers get involved. And so there's usually these boards are deciding on what will take, what scale is significant enough for us to say, okay, we're ready to go from this scale and moving forward. And this is where I think the industry as well can help, where they say, okay, we're not just going to invest money into new technologies, but we also want to invest in helping with these pilots and these demonstration plants to show how this new technology works in the process.
And that's all leading towards greener solutions. So how do the economic and market dynamics influence the transition to greener solutions?
Sure. So the chemical industry and petrochemical industry is very comfortable working with regulations, and we've seen this historically. So you have changes to gasoline regulations in the U.S., and we put in tons of fuel ethanol plants in a 10-year period. You have the REACH regulations in the European Union, which was trying to protect people from certain chemicals, and the European Union chemical producers very quickly removed those substances from their chemicals and addressed the situation. Now with decarbonization and with the net zero goals, and one thing to mention too is that most of the chemical producers are aligned with net zero. If you look at the top 100 chemical producers, 80% have committed to net zero by 2050,
Awesome.
and the majority of those have net zero goals by 2030 or interim goals by 2030. So they're focused on that. We are seeing in different regions carbon pricing, carbon border adjustment mechanisms, sticks and carrots that will help the industry move forward into these somewhat new areas of decarbonizing their product. We're also seeing a push from customers. So we see that, okay, I don't want to use single-use plastic. I would like a reusable bag. Okay, well, that then pushes production away from single-use plastic to more durable plastics potentially. Or I want to switch to an EV instead of an ICE vehicle. So it's something that we are seeing customer demand, which is leading those suppliers to the customers to push the chemical and petrochemical industry to decarbonize and to clean up.
That's wonderful. What about policies? When we are looking at regional differences in how the petrochemical industry is approaching decarbonization, are there policies that are helping you, hindering you? How does that look?
So we do see quite a few policies for decarbonization that are moving us forward. Regionally, we find that Europe is somewhat leading the way in terms of regulations. So they put in the carbon border adjustment mechanism. They're putting in steps to make sure that chemicals produced within the union or that are imported are sustainable, are low carbon. Unfortunately, Europe, with the current energy prices and natural gas prices in Europe, it's very challenging to produce chemicals in Europe. So you are seeing recent announcements from Dow and others that they're actually shutting down units in Europe. And over the past 20 years, you've seen the global share of chemical production in Europe go from about 25% down to about 13%, according to the European Chemical Council. So you are seeing a shrinking of the chemical production in Europe. Now, what's happening, though, is that the regulations in Europe are actually pushing chemical producers around the globe to then say, okay, well, we want to sell this into the European Union. What is the carbon intensity we need to meet? How low carbon does our product need to be able to actually sell this into Europe? We're seeing very similar things in the US, Asia, and the Middle East. In the US, we've just recently got more clarity on what incentives will be there for certain types of production. And we're seeing the same in the Middle East and Asia.
Okay, so looking ahead, if you are thinking future, what does the future hold for the industry?
So whenever we talk future, I always like to go back and look at the past. And I will say the chemical industry has been very nimble. We've really taken a hard look at how do we improve the efficiency of our chemical production? How do we make sure we're getting the most out of our feedstocks? Another example that even before all of this net zero talk, there were regulations in the European Union and the US on reducing NOx emissions. So if you look at NOx emissions, they were decreased significantly the 10 years in the early 2000s.
What is NOx?
NOx is
Yeah.
nitrous oxide. Sorry, thanks. I'm going back to my chemical engineer, and my chemists out there will get it. But it's a shorthand for the different nitrous oxide groups.
Got it.
NO2,
Okay.
N2O, and other chemicals.
Got
so it's damaging to the environment, and so there were regulations first on NOx before a lot of this net zero discussion came to be.
Okay.
And so we've already seen the industry adjust to these new regulations, and I see us moving forward with more sustainable chemical production. I think you're going to end up, though, that some sectors of the industry will move faster than others. Right now, we're seeing, for example, the ammonia industry move pretty quickly in decarbonizing. One reason for that is that it's somewhat easier to decarbonize that chemical than others. And so we are seeing kind of some industries or some sectors of the industry moving faster than others. And we're really working with many different chemical producers on how can we decarbonize their process.
I was going to ask you about collaboration.
Yeah.
I was like, are you leading the way as the Lone Ranger, or are we collaborating? And would you say that the industry itself is innovative in those collaborations?
Yes, I've seen a lot of collaboration recently. I think in the past 5 years, people have understood that I'm not going to be selling my chemicals to the same customers, especially the lower carbon version might have a completely different use, right? So instead of selling ammonia as a fertilizer, I'm going to sell ammonia as a fuel, a maritime fuel. And so that's something that we are seeing in the industry, that you have to collaborate with new customers. And that's taken the form both of, we've seen joint ventures between chemical producers and their end user. We've also seen collaboration agreements or long-term collaboration agreements on decarbonizing chemical XYZ so that we have a low carbon solution there.
And I can only imagine, even with just those you've mentioned, there's many stakeholders in the industry itself. If you could look a stakeholder in the eye and just offer advice, what advice would you give a stakeholder?
So I think collaboration is the first one, but then after that, I think it's, you need to invest. And that's not just investing capital. You need to invest time on these pilot and demo units. You need to invest time in monitoring the new technologies that are coming up in the chemical industry, from startups, from incumbents and others, so that you understand, okay, what does the green path look like? What does the lower carbon production look like? I think secondly, you have to take a hard look at your assets, your existing chemical plants. How do I decarbonize those? Okay, regulation's not here yet, but it'll be finalized soon, or it'll be finalized next year. How do I make sure that I have a plan in place for my assets so that I know exactly how I can decarbonize each of them or lower the carbon intensity of each of them moving forward? And it's going to be different for each one. So if I've got a chemical plant in Egypt, you're going to decarbonize differently than a chemical plant in the Gulf Coast of the United States. So in terms of renewable energy and others, it's going to be challenging. But I think with planning for it, you'll have a better way of seeing, okay, these assets can easily be decarbonized. These are harder to decarbonize. And here's a plan moving forward so we can still achieve our publicly stated net zero goals by 2050.
Thank you, Tim. What a fascinating discussion, and the insights of decarbonizing the petrochemical industry. Truly appreciate your wisdom and having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Really enjoyed it.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Be sure to follow us to hear more from SLB's diverse team of changemakers and experts in energy transition. Until next time.